Hey, welcome everyone to this informal chat about art and creativity in video games. My name is Liviu Boar. I'm from a very small Romanian indie team working on a very small indie game. And I'm more than just a little bit intimidated to be between these two guys here. So first and foremost, I'm gonna just ask them to just say like very quick few words about themselves.
Sure. Hi, I'm Chris Evans. I am currently the supervisor of Blizzard Cinematics in-game cinematics department. So we make all of the cinematics that directly kind of affect gameplay or are involved with quest design. I've been in the 3D industry for about 20 years, and I've worked in a wide variety of environments, TVs, film, video games, obviously. So, yeah.
Ah, interesting. We have some similarities. We have a lot to talk about.
All right.
So I'm Henry LaBounta, and I have a talk after lunch at 2 o'clock, and I'll talk more about my career then. But I'm the studio art director at EA Ghost Games. So I'm based in Guildford. I live in London currently, and we're working on this game in the UK, Sweden, here in Romania, here in Bucharest. We have a studio as well. And Vancouver and Shanghai, and as games are made these days. My background is, for a long time in games. My first game was SSX3 in Vancouver, and then before that, I was a film visual effects supervisor and worked in feature animation at DreamWorks and the television industry in New York City as well when I got out of art school.
Wow. Okay, so I haven't done a lot. But yeah, really, it's really an honor for me to be here with you guys here because I've consumed a lot of the media that you guys have been making. And if I'm not mistaken, you guys both have also previous experience in film, right? I remember back when StarCraft dropped. It was just amazing for me and my friends to just watch those cinematics and just be in awe of them. And the years passed, and incredibly for me at least, and I think for a lot of people, we're almost at that level, or maybe really at that level, where it's really hard to even distinguish between cinematics and real-time graphics. And we've just experienced this as gamers, watching games evolve. And I was just curious what your perspective, what this was like from your perspective as guys actually making this magic happen.
Why don't you start? It's more cinematics related. Yeah.
Boy, that's a big question.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think I actually just gave a whole talk on this.
It's true.
So, not to be repeating myself, but so the industry is obviously going real time. That's sort of what seems to be happening. However, from my point of view, there's still some barriers to be crossed. Obviously, with the real time content, you're very, very dependent on the hardware that's being played back on. Now that's becoming less of an issue as consoles take over more and more of the industry. There's also the issue of a deliverable to the game team. So, for example, when we're working on cinematics, if we deliver a real-time cinematic, I mean, what a real-time cinematic is it's essentially a set of instructions that are delivered to a game engine that call assets and animations and, set a location in the world. Then you have the problem of game designers who are constantly changing that stuff. And so your real-time cinematics can be very prone to changing on you, right? So that's sort of I guess that's sort of some of the technical stuff. I think on the art level, boy, I mean we're beginning to see an alignment of the tools. We're beginning to see game engines that can handle the huge textures, that can handle things like complex deformations on characters. We're beginning. A big one is subsurface. I mean, I think that's sort of if you're gonna make realistic humans, do people know what subsurface scattering is? Okay, yeah. So it's basically the way light shines through flesh, and so it's translucence. I think the game engines are catching up with what the traditional renderers like RenderMan can do. I don't think they're there yet. I don't know that I've ever seen a test with like a realistic human in a game next to an actual shot human. Have you seen anything like that?
Working on some
Working.
stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, well, you
yeah.
should talk about
Yeah.
that.
You know, for me, I think what's happened over the years is the hardware gets faster, but the player's expectations get higher also.
Yep.
And you always have this dream that this new console that's coming out is going to be able to do everything you ever wanted to do, but you just throw more at it. So, you know, maybe someday we'll get there. And the very latest generation of consoles are really powerful, as are the engines. So I think we are getting to the point where, on a limited basis, with a limited number of characters and a scene that's, you know, contained, we could get real-time cinematics that are pretty convincing. But you know, I don't think we're there yet either. I
Well,
totally agree with Chris. Yeah.
and then the other thing with that is, like, you know, you just, like you saying, on a limited basis with a limited number of characters, like, if you control yourself, and of course once you throw it out there to creative people, they're like, no, I want 10,000 of them,
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah.
going to be big and purple, and it's
Yeah.
going to, like, and you're like,
Yeah.
no, I can't do, oh no.
I think
There's a lot of magic in that way you reveal detail, though. You
Yeah.
know, that standard trick of, you know, seeing the drops drip off of a leaf and then you pull back and it's not that same leaf anymore, but in your mind you might think it is. And you know, it's all storytelling. So, you know, if you can kind of get people to go along with that, and I think the work you guys do at Blizzard is fantastic that way.
I agree.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess the other big aspect for me too is that whole debate of, you know, how true do the cinematic experience need to be to the gameplay experience, or and you know, as you're playing a game, do you actually want to watch a movie, or do you want to continue playing the game? So the more interactive we can make it, I think the better experience it'll be in the end, and hopefully we'll get there soon.
And I think everyone is curious about when and if and when we're going to finally get past the uncanny valley in video games.
Yeah.
Is there an actual answer to that, or is it just too early? Is it just too early to?
You know, a while back I did a TEDx talk about this very thing that's on YouTube, and it's old, but I think it still applies. You know, I think we know more about what you need to do that, but it's even hard in movies, honestly, especially with a character that looks very realistic. If you have a very stylized character, somebody that doesn't look like us, it's easier to get away with, but the human eye is so attuned to the slightest imperfections. It makes it really difficult.
You worked on Twister, right?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so I remember watching that movie in a cinema, and I was just absolutely blown away by it. But the expectations for people have been getting accustomed to seeing CG in their movies. Has it been becoming more difficult or easier to fool us into thinking that art is actually real?
You know, I don't know that people think about it the same way they used to. You know, back when we were doing that, like Twister, for example, all of that was so new. The flying cows and tumbling buildings, and you know, nobody had really done a disaster movie like that before. And then a whole bunch of disaster movies came
That cow was
afterward.
iconic.
Yeah. And I think now the expectation is, like, even in you know, great television programs these days, there's great visual effects. You know, Game of Thrones and so forth. There's some really great work being done. But I don't think people just kind of expect it now. I don't think they kind of go like, oh, did you like the visual effects? Unless it's a big explosion. There's a lot of invisible visual effects that do so much to help tell the story that you don't notice, but are so key to making the film work.
Because I think I noticed them, but then I watched a VFX reel and I realized that I was fooled a lot more than I had suspected initially.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see this from an indie perspective, because I work in a 3-person team. So really what we needed to do was realize that there was no way that we were ever going to make anything realistic. So we're just making a cartoon game, and that's it. That's us facing our limitations from a very small, you know, indie perspective. But what is it like, you know, hitting limitations when you're at the absolute cutting edge? Is it just as frustrating, or are there limitations?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Is it frustrating? Well, I think the more, how to say this, the more, you know, we scope things prior to doing them, and we have a fairly good idea of what our capabilities are, and we set roadmaps for what we want to accomplish. Also, I think Blizzard, even if you look at some of our cinematics that are photoreal, I mean, if you really stop and look at those characters, they're not human proportions. They're not, there's nothing really human about them. And so I think we kind of, at Blizzard at least, we steer away from that uncanny valley by having very, very stylized worlds. So we don't set ourselves up to do that photorealistic thing.
And I actually think that's what works best about them, because I think they wouldn't really have the same impact had they been absolutely photorealistic. It's that wow factor that you guys are adding that is just incredible.
No pun intended.
I didn't even realize it. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm just curious, how do you guys feel about have you been involved in like traditional or analog type of art, or how did you come about? I know that you've had the opportunity to be working with technology very early on. Do you guys have like an analog art background? Is this something you always wanted to do?
Well, I went to art school a long time ago.
Did it help?
And at that time, what was it? It was the Apple II, I think, we had one computer in the art school, and I was the only person that ever did anything on it. And nobody was like, there's a computer in a room. It was like in a broom closet. Nobody knew what to do with it. Technology has come a long, long way, but personally, my true love is fine art. And I spend all my spare time going to galleries and museums and talking to artists. And, I think there's just some incredibly creative work there. Personally, that's I'd say is my true love. I don't think I never aspired to be work in the games industry. It didn't really exist even when I was going to art school, other than Pong, and stuff like that. It was a while ago, and I never, aspired to work in the film industry. My dream was to be a fine artist. So someday I'm going to get back to that dream.
And do you feel that digital art cheapens it? Just a little bit, maybe?
No, okay. I don't.
I'm happy to hear you say that.
Friends right now that are doing some fantastic digital art. I think just like photography, there's a period of acceptance, because it's a different art form. And different kind of language, a different way of expressing yourself. But yeah, there's some amazing stuff there. I think the controversial stuff for me right now is the machine learning aspect of, the AI aspect of creating art. That is really intriguing. And I've been talking to people at Google Brain and elsewhere about some of the work they're doing. I'm super excited about that, but it's very controversial too.
It's kind of scary, isn't it?
It is kind of scary. The robots are taking over the world.
There's in the Neuromancer series by William Gibson, there's one of the artificial intelligences is like stuck up in a space station. It's just, do you remember this? Yeah. And it's like sitting there, it's like it just sits there and makes art all the time. And then just,
it's crazy. Yeah.
That's probably going to happen a bit later rather than sooner, right? Let's all hope so.
There's interesting stuff happening right now.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just look at it as another tool, really. When I first started out in television at NBC New York, there were a lot of artists that, use physical materials to make things for Saturday Night Live and all that stuff. And my wife and I worked there, she's my wife now, but we worked there and did digital versions of that. And at that time, it was kind of like, what are these machines? It was like, oh, evil machines. But it's just a different type of artist tool. And I think machine learning stuff will be that too at some point.
Really cool. Yeah, I don't know. Using the first time I ever used the Wacom tablet, I was like, this is perfect. This is exactly like the real thing, Yeah. Half a year later, I just realized that it really wasn't
exactly
wasn't really all that.
Give me a piece of paper.
Really wasn't all that close to it. You mentioned that you went to art school. I did too. It was a frustrating experience for me because this was back in the 2000s here in Romania, and nobody really knew what digital art really was. So we were almost literally stuck in the Middle Ages because we were doing engraving on, I was aspiring to get into the 21st century. I was interested in Photoshop and stuff, but I was stuck just etching away at copper plates.
You probably learned a lot doing that, though.
Yeah, I guess. I learned a lot of restraint.
Yeah, right. Patience.
What about you, Chris? Anything analog?
Well, no, because I like photography. I love to shoot photographs.
So how does that trend? Was it a smooth transition into 3D from photography?
Well, actually, it's interesting. I came to photography after 3D. I kind of found 3D very early. I was in a band, and the place where they were doing our album cover, they had a copy of Strata Studio Pro, and I started playing with this 3D application, and it was just the most amazing thing to me. I was just enthralled by it, and that was right about when it was just like 3D was very much in its infancy, and Pixar was just getting started, and I just knew right then and there, it's like, I'm not going to be a musician, I'm going to do this for a living. And I just kind of slowly worked my way in to doing TV commercials, and I became a lighter and worked in movies for a while. And then at Blizzard, as I worked longer and longer movies and moved kind of up, I became more and more of a technical artist, and sort of left the whole art part aside. Excuse me, Mike. And only recently came back to now that I'm supervising. In the last few years, I've sort of picked back up like the visual kind of disciplines, and so photography was a natural way for me to really start to express myself and try and find whatever that is we're looking for.
So did the technical difficulties that you face when doing analog photography, did that help you deal with the whole technical aspect of making 3D? Because I know that I've tried. I was forced to do photography in college. I didn't really gel with it because it was way too technical, and all my photos came out crappy.
Huh. I really enjoyed the discovery of like, oh well, this is what aperture actually does. This is how shutter speed is going to affect things. This is what composition is about. That experience of walking around and really like trying to see the world in different ways. I want to see the world from the perspective of light. I want to see the world from the perspective of shape. I want to see the world from the perspective of composition. And what does that do? And what's important, and how do you balance these things? And I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, you absolutely are. Yeah.
And then the technical hurdles in achieving, I think what happens when we're all making art is like, or we're all doing something, is like we have this picture in our head about the idealized outcome, and then there's the hurdles to get there, and the process is what brings us the satisfaction, right? And for me, it's certainly two-part. I know it's controversial once again these days because there's so much. I mean, digital has definitely changed photography. It's totally different, and it is completely accepted now that you're going to edit the photograph a lot when you're done. So that's part of the process for me too. There's the taking of the pictures, excuse me, and then there's the sitting down, and I'll stay up late at night. My wife can attest to this. In the glow of the computer screen, like looking through these photographs, like trying to find things. Like I flatten the image out, I deepen it, I add more color, I take color away. Like that's part of the process too, for me.
That was absolutely something that drew me back into photography. It going digital was, it was becoming just such a friendlier medium. Because you did that before taking the picture. I mean, after taking the picture, not before taking the picture, which was the... and you had no LCD display to show you what you had done.
Right, exactly.
It was like the difference between real-time and turn-based strategy, just...
Well, and the fun thing at Blizzard, of course, is you have probably some of the best artists in the world, and I bring in my work, and they're like, oh yeah, you're doing that? Oh, that's nice. I would totally put that on my refrigerator. Good work.
Is that intimidating?
Yes. It's intimidating, and it's also wonderful. I mean, what I found is the truly talented artists they are just so humble And I mean, I think anybody who's really good at something, I mean, it just kind of usually, I mean, there's exceptions to everything, of course, but usually they're super humble and willing to teach. One person I think in particular is Jake Monahan, who unfortunately left Blizzard, but just a fantastic artist who did a lot of the concepting for the Last Bastion piece, and just an amazing understanding of light, and would do these paintings that he did one of like a woman sitting in this little pod, and she's dressed in purple and she's kind of curled up and reading a book. And it's like the whole image just glows. And it's like, how do you understand that? Like how did you make that happen on a 2D plane, and like to get that, like you just get drawn into this, and getting to work with people like that is just, it's really special. So yeah.
Henry, I wanted to ask you something. I realized that what Chris was talking about, envisioning something before you make it. I realized that a lot of the times in the beginning, I was just envisioning a little bit too much, right? And then that led a little bit to frustration. Was this something that you had to come to blows with? Is it right now when you're envisioning something SFX related or something? Do you visualize it at the ideal stage, or did you come to willingly limit yourself and understand that this is what can be achieved?
Well, that's so. My first game I worked on, SSX3, for example. I came to games with my film experience, not knowing the limitation of games, and at first I and some people on the team thought that might be a limitation, but Mike Rayner and his team, the engineers, were just brilliant, and they're like, no, we don't want you to filter it down to what you think can be done in a game. Tell us what you really want to do. We'll figure it out. And there were quite a few things on that game, and even one of my more recent games, and all throughout, that you start a project, and the team's saying, yeah, we won't be able to do that. We won't be able to do that. We won't be able to do that. And almost always I find a way to get it done. And it's amazing. I remember I was working on Need for Speed Hot Pursuit with the Criterion team. This was maybe 6 years ago in the UK. And I really wanted to get wet roads in the game. But due to performance reasons, it was like, so there was a little yellow sticky that said wet roads that was on our dailies board every single morning. And there was a trash can right here. And they kind of go, let's put that in there, because it's not going to happen. It's like, that stays there. It's going to happen. And we got to the point when the game was almost done. Basically, we were locking down art and everything, and working with Scott Harbour, our technical artist, who I really depend on. Great technical artists can be such and a great graphics engineer. It's amazing what you can do. We figured out a way to get it in the game. We put it in the game, and we started making rain and adding atmosphere. And the team saw it, and they were like, this looks amazing. Why didn't we do this earlier? And I was like, I told you so, So, as an art director, I think part of what I recommend to people is like, always be pushing for your vision. There's going to be producers or development directors or, whatever you call them at different studios that are going to be responsible to get stuff done on time and on budget. And there's checks and balances in that process, and that's good. But somebody has to be pushing for the good stuff, So, and I right off tell people, I'm going to ask you to do things you don't think you're going to be able to do. And quite often, we get them done. We find a way to get it done. That's what makes it fun, working with all these talented people and ideas coming from everybody. And it may not be exactly what I envisioned, but oftentimes it's even better than what I envision through the input of the other artists and engineers. Yeah.
Now, do you guys have a CBB? Could be better.
Yes, CBB.
CBB.
You know that term. I
Could
use
be better.
that term all the time. Yeah, we'll keep that list going.
Yep.
Okay, fine. We'll move on, but we're coming back to this one. It's on the CBB list.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a huge difference between big and small teams, because in my case, I'm the one setting the expectations, and I have to deliver too. So it's like an internal battle going on there. There's also another question that's a little bit off. Will there be another skate game?
Oh, that's so funny. I don't know, honestly. Even if I knew, I probably couldn't tell you, but I honestly don't know.
Okay.
But I loved working on Skate and Skate 2 and Skate It. And I'll talk a little bit about that in my talk at 2, but yeah.
I know this might be a controversial opinion, but I think it's one of the best open world games ever.
Wow.
Because it just, I don't know, it's fun constantly throughout. There is no downtime.
Right.
And it's up to you when you're having the fun. Okay, I've noticed that we have only 5 minutes going left here. So if I guess we can open this up to questions. If you guys feel like asking Henry and Chris any questions, we are open now. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me? All right. So I would like to ask Henry if he ever sees a real marriage between fine art and games. Can you make fine art through your game? And I know there are some examples already. There is a Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which is considered art in itself, but it's still debatable. And there have been experiments, but what do you think as a fine art lover?
Wow, that is probably the most interesting question anybody's ever asked me. So thank you for that, first of all. Do you have an hour or so to talk about that? Because I will go on and on. But briefly,
there's lunch. So.
You said you make stylized games. Now, one thing I want to say is people for a long time have thought that, photoreal is the ultimate games, but I don't know about that. You know, like when Journey first came out, or even Monument Valley, the mobile game, some beautiful artistic work being done in very stylized games. You know, people debate, is it art? I think it's all art, but is it fine art is the question you're getting at, which is really the key question, I think. And I think VR brings a whole new dimension to all of this. I've been to quite a few galleries in London where they have VR set up. And, you know, the technical execution of what's being done is pretty primitive still, but it's art. And I remember in art school having this impassioned debate with a professor because he was claiming that Native American art wasn't fine art, that it was a craft. And I was like, oh boy, that kind of hurts me. I don't know. I don't know if I can agree with that. I was practically in tears debating with him about this. Yes, I do think there fine art and games, interactive fine art can be a thing, and you could argue already is a thing in some cases. Yeah, I do.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Let's make one. Just go out there and make one.
Sure.
Yes.
As soon as I get the financing. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go to Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Oh boy, that's another story.
Yeah. A friend just made The Shape of Time, and it's a beautiful game. A really relaxing kind of game. I like those kind of games that aren't just personally all shooting and aggression and yeah.
I know with Blizzard, one of the first things that happens when a game is being concepted or thought about is we kind of just let the artist loose on it. And so hanging inside Blizzard are a number of paintings by just fantastic art. Braum did a bunch of stuff for Diablo. And that's what inspires us. So maybe that's what we're aiming for. You know, like we look at that stuff on the walls and we try and bring the game as close to that as we can. I mean, I remember some of the beautiful work they did for StarCraft. It's like just pieces that were just totally about mood. You know, there's one of Raynor sitting on, if you go to Blizzard and you go in the Blizzard Museum, there's one of Jim Raynor sitting on a motorcycle. That's all it is. It's just a mood piece, right? But that inspires the game. And so I think I know you didn't ask me, but I think we always work to get closer to that.
And it surely shows in your games. The fact that you have some of the best artists in the world all there being together, having this very creative environment, because environment is so crucial.
Yep.
It just shows. I personally follow some of the artists who work there, and I greatly admire them, and they inspire me in my work.
Yep. Well, on almost every stairwell, when you're going up, so there's these stairwells where you can, game teams often have 2 floors, and there's these giant walls at Blizzard, and almost every single one of those walls has a painting on it, like a painting that's printed, 20 by 40 feet. Huge, of some artists' work.
Cool. Let's take one other question. Anyone else?
So
I saw someone in the back. Can you raise your hand again?
I also have a mic. So
Cool.
this is for both Henry and Chris. Both of you have a background in, in the cinema or in TV. What motivated you to get into games?
I was just doing an interview and got asked that question. I get asked it a lot, so I'll start off. I was shooting a commercial up in Vancouver after I finished Minority Report, I think it was, or AI. I forget, one of those movies. A friend was working at Electronic Arts, and he said, "Oh, you should stop by Electronic Arts." I really wasn't into games at that time, but on the set, everybody was playing games. I was like, "Wow, these games look really fun, but they actually don't look that good." At the time, this is 2000 or so, from my perspective. I went by Electronic Arts, and they sent me home with a stack of games. I started playing SSX Tricky with my daughter, and we were having so much fun. I was like, man, I could make this look so much better. And I'd done film and television for quite a while, and I always liked challenges. I always liked learning. And I thought, well, I've never done this before. Let's give this a try. It was right after 9/11. George Bush was in office. My wife was like, move to Canada? Okay, sure, we can do that. So we moved up to Vancouver and started making games, and I've never regretted it. I feel like there's a lot more creative opportunity in games than you get in film. In film, you do some really amazing things, but it's kind of very narrow slice, of lots of decisions are being made by other people.
Mm-hmm.
But in games, there's just such a bigger canvas and bigger palette to work with in terms of creative expression. So creatively, I find it more interesting.
I think I would answer this question by saying I moved to California, and I remember walking down to the ocean, and just looking at the ocean wasn't enough. I wanted to get in the ocean. I wanted to play in the ocean. I don't want to watch the ocean. I want to play in the ocean. And I think that same thing applies for me with film and games. Like, to me, games are a world that you jump in and you interact with it. And I agree with you that there's a lot more room for creative expression. There's a lot more going on in a game. I don't know if any of you were at my previous talk. I just spoke before this, and I talked about this idea that when you develop a story for a film, that's it. They don't really want to change much. Once they've figured out what's going to happen, the actual creation of the film is pretty locked down at this point. Whereas games, they're figuring out details and how things work and what's going to happen right up to the very end. And so it's an interactive and iterative process that I love.
Cool. So,
Okay.
You want to say something?
No. I was just going to say that was it for the questions, and thank you very much for attending.